Hey guys, Jordan here with Watchers in the Dark. We just finished up week 2 of the Nephilim meta. So we've had 2 full weeks of GTs and majors that allowed the Nephilim pack, as well as the big balance slate that came right around that time, and the FAQ and the points changes and so on and so forth. And with that, we have a really big shakeup in the meta, and one thing I've been doing lately is trying to keep track of what are the top lists in the meta and what are they running as well. So far we've had a handful of events, but before we get into that, talk about how I'm collecting this data. I'm going to put links down below if you think this is boring and you want to skip straight to the meat of it. But basically the methodology. So for the most part, I'm looking at Best Coast pairings. We did also come up with some lists from a website called Mini Headquarters. There was a big event in France that they covered. I'm only really concerned with undefeated lists. They have to be singles events, so no teams. Although teams are still interesting to look at, I don't really want that in my data set. All these events have to take place after Nephilim was released, and use Nephilim. Nephilim came out on June 24th, but we really didn't see any results until around July 8th. I only want to include GTs and majors and larger events. What exactly does that mean? Well, I'm going to use the Frontline Gaming's definition for that, which means they have to have at least 5 rounds and at least 28 players. I'm also only really looking at 2,000 point armies because the meta changes dramatically if you're talking about like combat patrol tournaments, which luckily there aren't too many of those. So with the methodology out of the way, what are the results? I'll go ahead and throw that up on the screen here for you guys. So it looks like so far we've had 10 events. Out of those 10, we have 4 undefeated Sisters of Battle lists, and 3 undefeated Space Marine lists, 2 undefeated Tau and Necron lists, and then just 1 from Imperial Knights, Death Guard, Thousand Sons, Eldar, Orcs, and Tyranids. At first glance, it looks like we have a really nice spread of factions. Not everybody is here yet, but we've really only had 2 full weeks of tournaments. It would be nice to see some other armies like Chaos Space Marines and Drukhari and Imperial Guard start to show up in this data, but give it some time, we might see some more of those appear and get some more diversity. But for only 2 weeks and 10 events, this is a pretty good spread of units. There's not one army that's really decimating, although Sisters of Battle and Space Marines are sitting in a comfortable first and second place so far. But that could change dramatically. Again, we're only 10 tournaments and a total of 17 lists. So let's take a look at the Sisters of Battle and how they've been doing. If we drill down a little bit, we can take a look at what subfactions they're using. Every list I looked at used Bloody Rose, so we've really identified an archetype at this point, I think. The other subfactions just don't exist, which makes sense. Bloody Rose has a clear advantage over the others, and it does what it does the things you want. It makes you better in melee, so all your hard-hitting units like Repentia, Zephyrim, etc., they can get into melee, do the damage they need to kill the opponent off the objective. And that's really what you want if you're going to be playing primaries, which is something the Sisters otherwise struggle with. So what units are appearing in these armies? Not that surprisingly to me, but maybe surprising to other people, is that they are using a lot of common units. So there were 4 lists in total, remember. And I'll go ahead and throw this up on the screen so you guys can see what units were in those lists. So, in these 4 undefeated lists, the Canoness appeared 4 times, Morgenval appeared 4 times, Sisters of Battle appeared 4 times, Dogmata, Repentia, Zephyrim Squad, Retributor Squad, and Sororitas Rhino all appeared 4 times. And all 4 of these undefeated lists at GTs and Majors. So that appears to be the core that you want in your armies, which, having fought Sisters a few times, I think that tracks. Those are all very solid units. As somebody on the other side of the board, I'm sitting here, I'm worried about, can the Repentia catch me? What will the Zephyrim do to me when they do catch me inevitably? How much do those Meltaguns from the Retributors do? Those are things that I'm worried about when I see my opponent's Sisters army on the other side of the board. So it makes sense that we would see those in there. If we look further down the list, we've got a few other units that do appear quite frequently. The Novitiate Squad, Sacrosanct, Repentia Superior surprisingly did not appear all 4 times. I guess they don't need her in every single list. The Hospitalier appeared in most of the lists. Surprisingly, we did not see that many Celestines, but she did appear in one of the 4 undefeated lists, as well as 1 Crusader, 1 Preacher, 1 Seraphim Squad, 1 Castigator, 1 Missionary, and 1 Palatine. So what exactly does a list look like that uses those first, what is it, maybe 10 units at the top? This is what Manichima brought to Bournemouth Brawl, a big event in England. I think it was the first super major to use Nephilim. He went 7-0 with this. This happened on July 8th. I checked. It does appear they used the Nephilim mission pack. There were 63 players in total. One thing to keep in mind, though, is they used player-placed terrain, meaning there was basically a pool of terrain off to the side. If memory serves, it was about 8 ruins and a couple forests, and players would take turns putting them on the board. So you could have your own ideal terrain setup on your side of the board, and your opponent would have their ideal setup on their side of the board, which that helps Sisters a lot because they're a very fragile army, and the terrain placement really makes or breaks their success. The other faction I wanted to talk a little bit about briefly was Space Marines, who have 3 undefeated lists at these 10 events, which puts them in 2nd place after the Sororitas. Now, unlike the Sororitas, these lists are all over the place. We've got 1 Blood Angel player, 1 Deathwatch player, 1 Black Templar player. The units they're using, really, there's almost nothing in common. I mean, 2 of them used a Primaris Chaplain, 2 of them used an Incursor Squad. Otherwise, there was absolutely nothing in common between any of these lists. So I think we're going to need some more time before we can really identify if there is a solid Space Marine archetype. One thing I will say is there's a lot of infantry in these lists. There are not very many mechanized units. So I think that there is an archetype that is ideal for Space Marines. It's going to be some sort of infantry heavy list that tries to close the gap on the enemy, maybe do a little bit of shooting before you soften them up to finish them off in melee. Now, I would be remiss if we did not stop to talk about ATC. One of the biggest team tournaments in the world happened this weekend. We got to see the Art of War guys win that one in the end. Now, the reason I don't have that in my data set is team tournaments are very skewy. By that, I mean if you've never been to one, then you should know that you take turns picking your pairings. So that way you always get roughly half of the ideal matchups, and your opponent gets half ideal matchups as well. So you really don't want to bring a take-all-comers list because you have some say in who you're fighting. People typically bring skew lists. So the kind of list you would see at a team tournament would probably do poorly at a singles event. But if you want to look at who won ATC, I'll go and throw that up on the screen for you guys. It was the Art of War team at the end of the day. They had several different factions. We got to see Necrons, Adeptus Sororitas, Blood Angels, Craftworld Eldar, and Drukhari. But that is everything I have for week 2. I'm going to try and keep doing this series so that way you guys can see how the meta is evolving at the top tables. Let me know what you think, if there's anything you would like me to try to find and include in these videos. We would love it also if you like and subscribe. That really helps the YouTube algorithm and helps us grow. And until next week, peace out.